So a few months ago, I made a video tackling the myth of the triangular bayonet, in which I challenged the assertion that triangular blades are purposely designed to create a more lethal wound. And that video turned out to be pretty popular, with over 200,000 views as of the time of this recording. And as is the case anytime one of these videos gets really popular, there were plenty of people in the comments section chiming in with their own takes on bayonets, ranging from good to interesting, to say the least. There was one person, for example, who went as far as to suggest that bayonets are a real man's weapon, and that the invention of things like guns and gunpowder and bullets made soldiers lazy and cowardly, too afraid to get right up in the enemy's face, unlike the good old days when everyone used swords. Which is, a hot take if I've ever seen one, and also completely disregards the fact that throughout most of human history, spears have also been a thing as well, so make of that what you will. But if there's one thing that the comments on that video illustrated to me, it's that there are plenty of other misconceptions that people have about bayonets, besides the assertion that triangular blades create a more lethal wound. In fact, I meant to address these other misconceptions in the last video, but I ended up not doing it in the interest of saving time. So I'm doing it now. Without further ado, here's a few more points on bayonets. You can't really see it because it's all off frame, but I have a bit of a collection going on here in front of me. I have my socket bayonet for my shortland pattern musket, aka Brown Bess. I have my 1907 pattern bayonet for my SMLE for my World War I impression. I have a 1903 pattern bayonet, which is meant to fit the long Lee Enfield, which is the predecessor to the SMLE. And I have my 1751 pattern infantry hanger, which the more astute of you will note is not a bayonet. But it does share a feature with the rest of these blades, and that's this thing right here. This little channel going down the middle. If we look at the rest of the blades, you can see that they all, aside from the 1903 pattern bayonet, have something similar. It might be a little hard to see on the camera, but the socket bayonet has these little recessed channels on the edges of the blade. And the 1907 pattern bayonet as well has these two little lines chiseled out down the middle of either side. They're not totally flat edges. And this is a common feature that you can see in a lot of bayonets and even in larger swords as well. But why is that? What is the purpose of these little channels? Well, a lot of people will tell you, ooh, it's a blood groove, and that the purpose is so that when you thrust the blade into an opponent, it allows the blood to flow out freely and reduce suction so that the blade doesn't get stuck. And that is pure unadulterated... Whoops. And that is pure unadulterated hogwash. Blood grooves are not a thing. It's a made-up term perpetuated by sword and knife vendors, hoping to ensnare hapless consumers into buying their products under the guise of making them appear more deadly. And it does sound enticing in a gruesome kind of way. You often hear reenactors regaling spectators with talk of it as a way of trying to wow them, but that doesn't make it any more true. The real term used to describe this feature is fuller. That's F-U-L-L-E-R, fuller. And they are not there to let the blood out and reduce suction, but rather to increase rigidity, kind of like I-beams, which are designed in such a way so as to promote more even distribution of weight, so that they're less likely to bend under stress. More crucially, they also serve the purpose of shaving off excess material and thereby reducing weight without compromising the integrity of the blade, which explains why the socket bayonet and the 1907 pattern bayonet and the 1751 hanger all have a fuller, while the 1903 pattern does not. Because look at how tiny this thing is compared to all of the others. It's already light as it is. Any weight that you can save by adding a fuller to it is basically negligible. It's also worth noting that if the purpose of the fuller really was purely to act as a channel to let the blood flow out when thrusting into an opponent, then there would be no reason for the 1751 pattern hanger to have one. It would make sense for the bayonets, as those are thrusting weapons, but a hanger is effectively a type of saber, which is primarily a slashing weapon. It's not like you're going to take this thing and thrust it into somebody's chest. That's not what it's designed for. It's not a rapier. And on top of all of that, the assertion that fullers relieve suction just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not like the human body is just some kind of vacuum that just pulls foreign objects into it. if you cut your way in, you can just as easily cut your way out, unless you happen to get stuck on a bone or something like that. But this idea that you have to twist the blade in order to withdraw, or worse yet, fire a round into the person you just stabbed, is not, strictly speaking, true. So that's the first myth I wanted to address: blood grooves. They're not a thing. Stop calling them that. And if all of this wasn't enough to convince you, well, consider that I am not the first person on YouTube to make a video on this topic. Scala Gladiatoria and Shadiversity have both made multiple videos addressing this very same myth, so if not from me, take it from them. The other myth I wanted to address doesn't pertain to bayonets directly, but it does relate to them by proxy, and it involves this thing here, this little nub on the end of the barrel of my Brown Bess here. This is a standard feature across most muskets used during the 18th and 19th centuries, and a lot of reenactors who are new to the hobby look at it for the first time and assume that it's a sight, before a more seasoned person jumps in and corrects them by saying, actually, it's not a sight, it's a bayonet lug. It holds the bayonet in place. And yeah, it does fulfill that purpose. The bayonet has a slot with a little notch at the base, so when you slip it over the barrel, you just turn it sideways and the little nub slides into the notch, and then the bayonet is secure. But contrary to popular belief, although it does serve this purpose, this is actually not called a bayonet lug. So what is it called? Trick question, it's a sight. It's always been a sight. And we know that it's a sight because there are documents from the period that specifically refer to it as such. Take this diagram, for instance, which comes from a plan of discipline composed for the use of the militia of the County of Norfolk, 1759. Notice how it clearly delineates every part of the musket. A, the barrel, B, the stock, C, the muzzle, D, the butt of the rammer, and then, clear as day, E, the sight. Doesn't get much more definitive than that. The insistence on referring to it as a bayonet lug stems mostly, I think, from another myth that reenactors seem fond of perpetuating, which is that the British Army did not aim their muskets. There's this perception that because the 1764 manual doesn't make any mention of aiming, that must mean that they didn't bother. And it's another way that Americans try to bring the British down while raising the rebels up. Like, yeah, unlike those stupid Brits, the Americans actually aimed at muskets. Well, the British did too, and there's plenty of references to them doing it as well. Although the manual does not say take aim specifically, Cuthbertson, yes, him again, says that great attention must be had in the instructing of recruits how to take aim and that they properly adjust their ball. So they did aim, and they aimed using, you guessed it, a sight, not a bayonet lug. Anyway, I hope that clears some things up for you. Thank you for watching, as usual. Leave a like and a comment down below if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and until next time, God save the king.